Hello, welcome to another edition of our book group discussion. We're -1 this time. You may notice Justine isn't here. She's been busy with other things this month, which you will see in the newsletter. She's going to tell you all about that.
Yeah, so, it's all a bit of a lame excuse, I think. She's been getting her children packed off to university. Yeah. So obviously far too busy to read. So it's just the two of us. Okay,
so my book this time is one that I haven't quite finished yet. I'll be honest. I'm about halfway through, and it is Politics on the Edge by Rory Stewart. I'm a big fan of Rory Stewart. I don't know if you are. I don't know if any of you have listened to the podcast, The Rest is Politics. I think we talked about it in a previous newsletter. This book starts really with him sort of investigating how to become an MP, and it goes through the whole selection process. And he was quite lucky because at the time he decided to become an MP, it was just at the same time as the expenses scandal. Do you remember that?
I do remember that. I think everyone remembers that.
And I think there was about 50 or so MPs had to stand down in shame after that. And so there were an awful lot of seats up for grabs. So he initially was put forward for Bracknell, but then was put forward for Penrith and Borders, which is sort of more his neck of the woods. So that was the one he was eventually selected for. So it goes through the whole selection process, the whole canvassing, knocking on doors, that sort of thing. He wasn't terribly popular actually to begin with because he can come across.
I've seen one or two episodes of the podcast, right. And what always amazes me is that he is one of the very, very few politicians that one can actually have any respect for, I suppose, and with integrity. Yep. In fact, I have read a few reviews. I haven't actually read any of the book at all, but I think he, from what I can gather, reflects on his time in politics with a degree of shame.
Yeah. That's what he said. He said the first feeling he has about when he thinks about it now is one of shame because just because of the way they all behave, which was really a revelation to him. Maybe shouldn't have been, but was. I've lost my thread now.
But I think most of us do actually feel now that politics is essential, and it doesn't matter which colour you're talking about here, red, blue or yellow, but is almost defined by lies. And certainly the tiny bits that I sort of read or listened to are very, very refreshing. Obviously, I think as he says himself, he'll never be a minister because he is actually...
He was actually a minister.
Yes, but he'll never be a minister now.
Well, no, because he's been expelled from the party.
Yes.
He was expelled because he didn't go along with Boris Johnson's... It was a Brexit vote, I think, and he defied the government and voted against whatever it was they were voting for. And he was actually expelled from the party, and he found out he was expelled by text message at the very same time, get this, that he was getting a Politician of the Year award from GQ magazine.
Right.
So on the same night he was expelled from the party but got this award. But one of the interesting things, one of the first things he had to vote on when he was elected to Parliament was... I think it was a Labour amendment, and it was to do with, I can't remember the exact details, but it was to do with the air ambulance, which was very pertinent to his constituency, Penrith and Borders. They have more air ambulance than any other constituency because of where it is.
Of course, yes.
And he wanted to vote for this amendment that Labour had put forward because there was a 3-line whip he wasn't allowed to. And because he has a conscience and principles, he actually went and hid in the toilets till the vote was over because he wasn't allowed to vote against it.
Wow.
So, yeah, that's... man of integrity, I think. But it's actually a beautifully written book, and if you listen to him on the podcast, he's very eloquent and obviously very well educated, and he writes that way, which makes it a very easy read. And actually, I'm alternating between reading this, and I've got it on Audible as well. So I listen to the audiobook and then I read a bit and listen to the audiobook, and which I find is a really nice way of doing it.
It probably is, isn't it? Because he has a very, very characteristic but very listenable voice.
Yes, yeah.
And no, that does sound really interesting.
It is. It's a revelation, and it just shows what petty stuff goes on in Parliament. These are people who are supposed to be running the country, and they're like a bunch of schoolboys and schoolgirls. I'm sorry, should I say? But they really are. It's like being in the school playground, which comes across in the book very well. And I say I haven't got to the end of it yet, but I kind of know how it ends. But I would highly recommend it if you're interested at all in politics, and even if you're not, it's very, very interesting, and actually quite amusing in parts. Yeah. Good. So Politics on the Edge, Rory Stewart.
Well, I'm not going to talk about politics because there isn't enough time in the world
for
us to deal with
Don't
that.
Get him started.
And I've very much gone over to reading more fiction now. At least you know it's made up, and it's not supposed to be true, so that's fine. And the book I'm going to talk about is this book. It's called The Covenant of Water, and it's written by an American professor, Abraham Verghese. It's it's a fascinating book. It spans a fairly large chunk of the 20th century, starting off in 1900. And the story essentially is of a orphaned, her father dies anyway, 12-year-old Indian girl living in a village in Kerala. And she is married off at the age of 12 to a 40-year-old man. And now initially one starts thinking unpleasant things or what have you, but no. So she's taken to the village called Parambul, and this is quite a small village in the Keralan backwaters. And obviously she's desperately homesick and distraught, having been sort of taken away from her family. But her husband, I suppose, really for the first, I don't know, perhaps 10 years or more following the marriage, is really like perhaps an elder brother to her. And what's fascinating about the book is that it's over a span of 70 plus years. Although obviously it's a novel, it has a lot of historical context to it, in the developments of India through that period. It also follows the development of aspects of medicine through that period. I won't give away sort of details, but the title, A Covenant of Water, relates to the fact that the family that she's now part of, one individual in pretty much every generation has died of drowning. And this is a fascinating thing, because initially you think, well, it just must be coincidence, what on earth can be going on? But it turns out it isn't just coincidence. I won't spoil it by talking about what happens, but it's a book that's beautifully written, it really is. The prose is delightful to read and go back and reread. The characters are very intricately woven together. There's a Scottish surgeon who finds himself quite close to the village, and his life through his 20s and then much later on intertwines with other lives of the villagers. It's a coming of age book. It's a historical novel. It's a book of intrigue as well, but it is so readable, and it is one of the books that when you read you feel there ought to be a sequel, because you want to know what happens with people's lives afterwards.
Yeah, because I've actually read this book as well, and I felt that because I read it on Kindle, and when you read a book on Kindle you never quite know when it's going to finish. And I remember pressing the page turner and that was it was done.
Yes.
Oh gosh, it's finished. Yes. But it is beautifully written.
Yes.
And there's this chap actually wrote, this is the first book he's written in 10 years, and his previous book, which I don't know, a lot of you might have read, it's called Cutting for Stone.
Yes, I've heard of it, but I've not read it.
And it's the medical detailing in it, because he's a doctor, isn't he? I think is he a surgeon?
He's a surgeon, yes.
In America now.
Yes.
I think, was he born in Ethiopia, I think?
Somewhere in East Africa, yes.
But yeah, some of the medical aspects are almost a little bit too much information, I found anyway. I don't know whether you did.
Yes, obviously it's a little bit, it's not exactly gory, but it does go into quite a lot of detail.
Yeah, but it is, as Duncan said, it's a beautiful book, and the characters, you just fall in love with all of them.
Yes.
They're all just so lovely.
I mean, to the point where it's difficult to imagine someone creating these characters. And I found myself reading it thinking, these must be people he knows. And this
never occurred
must...
to me, but,
it just felt like that, because the characters was so believable and so real. I also found that the descriptive nature of the book, this village, Parambul, which you you could just picture in your mind it being surrounded by these Caroline backwaters. It was it's an absolutely lovely book, The Covenant of Water. If you do end up listening to it on Audible, the author himself narrates it, which is lovely. It works very well. His Glaswegian accent, which is required for the Scottish surgeon, is a little bit iffy.
It's not great, is it?
It's not great. But apart from that, it's definitely recommendable. The Covenant of Water.
Yeah, it's a joy.
Yeah.
It really was.
So that's really what we've been reading.
Yeah.
Are reading.
I'm currently reading, just a quick spoiler for next time, I'm reading Kate Atkinson's book of short stories called Normal Rules Don't Apply. I think there's 9 stories in here and I've only read 5 and they're sort of slightly interconnecting, so I can't really say much more about it except I'm loving it. It's really enjoyable and I'm not a great short story fan, but I've really enjoyed them. They're a little bit otherworldly and a little bit strange, some of them. But yeah, if you want to pick that up, I might talk a little bit more about that next time.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed.
Okay.
Thank you.